Hey, what's up everybody? In this crash course tutorial for Cyborg by Free League Publishing and Stockholm Cartel, I'm going to explain how combat works. So let's fight!
Circulation uncensored.
All right, let's get into it. So the first thing that you're going to do when you enter combat is set up the initiative. So listen, there's a way to run initiative, and I'm going to explain that, and then I'm going to explain kind of my homebrew and why I do it the way I do it. But ultimately, your initiative is going to come down to a d6. So you roll a 1d6, and if it's a 1 through 3, the enemies attack first. If it's 4 through 6, the PCs act first. Now, if there's a tie, between any of the PCs or whatnot, then you do an agility plus 1d6 to determine the order of those. So it just kind of suggests that if you need that, you do that. Now, me personally, and maybe it's because my roots come from Cyberpunk and some other games that deal with initiative a little differently and a little more crunchy, I like to do initiative just starting off with agility plus a d6. Have all the players take their agility modifier, adjust the d6 and make that their initiative score. Now, if there's a tie within that, then I look at the agility adjustment and see who has the higher one, or if they have the same adjustment, go ahead and have them flip a coin, roll some dice. Whoever gets the higher goes first, or have them rock, paper, scissors, however you want to decide that at that point. But ultimately, I like to use that agility right off the bat. But of course, the set rules are just as I described with the d6, and then accounting for agility plus d6 if necessary. Once you have your initiative, you get into combat, and depending on what skill or stat or whatever that you use is going to depend on how you're attacking. So if it's a melee attack, it's going to be your strength that you're going to test. And you're going to see throughout here it says DR12, because as I explain in the general core sort of mechanics crash course video, and in character creation, a lot of times when they do these tests, they always mention a DR12 because that's kind of the average, that's the basic. But of course, it can be easier on weaker enemies and challenges, and harder on more challenging enemies or stronger enemies, right? So just keep that in mind, that this DR12 is just kind of the average, and that's why it's there. But ultimately, if it's a melee attack, it's going to be your strength that gets tested. If you're going to do a ranged attack, with a gun or something, it's going to test your presence, and it's going to test your agility if you're going to go into auto fire. And auto fire basically works the same way that you would do a range attack, testing your presence, except you're testing your agility, and if you succeed, you roll the damage, but if you succeed, you get to attack again, and it can go to that same target or a nearby target. And you can do that a third time as well. If there's a second success, then you have a third chance to do it. And then each damage is going to be reduced by the armor. And keep in mind, armor is set up by tiers. So anytime you're coming up with the damage, which is based on the weapon that you're using, right, with some adjustments based on certain things, mechanics, maybe a class or some type of bonus or penalty, depending on the moment. But ultimately, that damage is going to be reduced by the armor. And armor, like I said, is set up in tiers, where you're either reducing by a D2, a D4, a D6, or things like that. So you'll see that in the book when you get into armor, the different options for that. But that's how auto fire works. You have a chance to kind of get 3 shots into that target or nearby targets, depending on successes moving forward. And then defenses are always going to be an agility check. And keeping in mind that, and I mentioned this in the core mechanics crash course video, that the GM, the game master, isn't the one making the rolls. Like, even when an enemy is attacking or the players are attacking, they make the roll. You're not rolling to attack as the enemy, they're rolling to defend. They're going to roll their agility to see if they're able to kind of dodge that attack or not. But once in a while, as a game master, I might roll some damage, or on some of the charts to get reactions and different things. And if you dive into the book, you'll see all the different charts and little fun things to add flavor to scenes and situations. So in those cases, obviously, I do roll, but ultimately in combat, it's going to be all about the players. The next thing to mention is drone combat. With drones, it's a little bit different. Obviously, they don't have modifiers and set, stat skills and abilities, I should say. They're either controlled by the person running it, like, the orphaned gearhead that maybe is controlling the drone, or maybe it's run by an AI. Either way, you're just going to roll a d20 against that DR. And again, they say DR12 because that's the average, but it can be more or less depending on, the encounter or the test that you're trying to put in front of the players. But ultimately, the drone is controlled by a d20 against whatever DR. The other thing to mention are crits and fumbles. If you get a natural 20, now keeping in mind when you roll, if you get like an 18 and your modifier is a +2, which results in a 20, that's not a natural 20. That's not a crit. You have to roll an actual 20 on the die for it to be considered a crit, just as a fumble is a natural 1. So keep that in mind. But anyways, a crit success on an attack basically does double damage, and the target's armor or cover is also reduced by 1 tier, which is pretty significant. On a fumble, though, on a natural 1, on an attack, you're then going to roll a 1d6 and see what the outcome is. On a 1 through 3, you're just kind of out of ammo. Maybe you go to shoot and it's just, the clip falls out, or just click, click, oh shit, I need to reload. On a 4 or a 5, your weapon basically misfires or breaks and needs to be repaired. On a 6, it pretty much explodes and causes you damage. So as the player, if you get a fumble and you roll a 6 on that d6, your weapon explodes, and then you're going to roll a d6 and take that damage, which is rough. Now on defenses, the PC takes double damage on a fumble. So just like on a crit, on a defense, you get a free attack. Maybe I didn't mention that. Yeah, on a crit, you get on a defense a free attack, but on a fumble on a defense, you're taking double damage. So keep that in mind. It can be pretty brutal, just as it can be pretty rewarding, depending on if you get a fumble or a crit. So those natural 20s and 1s, they have some pretty interesting results there. The next thing is, after combat is over, as they say in the book, when the smoke clears, you got to count your bullets. And to do that, you're not actually tracking all the bullets through combat. As I talk about the general vibes of Cyborg in that sort of deep dive video crash course, I explain how Cyborg is all about style, right? It's style over substance. It's all about the flavor and the role playing, and they don't have a whole lot of crunch. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some optional rules. I'm going to mention those in a moment if you want to add some more crunch to the game, right? But ultimately, you're not sitting there counting bullets unless you really want to go for it. I've done that in other games. I've had players track that, and to have it be more immersive, but it can take away from combat in situations when you're sitting there counting bullets or trying to remember to track them down. So just keep that in mind. Here, for counting bullets, you roll a 1d8 after combat. Or a d6 if you used auto fire, and for each weapon you have fired, right? So a result of 1 through 3 indicates that the mag is empty and has to be replaced. Otherwise, there's still some bullets in it, and you'll just have to check that after the next round of combat. If there's still time after counting your bullets, meaning you can actually catch your breath and get a little bit of rest, you can actually restore d4 hit points. So if you've taken damage, it's a good idea after combat to count your bullets and maybe get a little bit of rest so you can heal. The other thing to mention during combat, and it's not necessarily a mechanic of actual combat in the sense of like damage and attacking, but it plays a major part in combative scenes, I guess is the word I want to say, in those moments when you enter combat, right? If you're fighting enemies, there's a thing called morale, and each NPC, each enemy, they have their morale stat. And ultimately, you're going to roll a 2d6 and see if it's greater than their morale score to see if they flee or surrender. And when you do those morale tests, you're basically doing them when like the group's leader has been eliminated, or half of the group is eliminated, or a single enemy is down to about 1/3 of their HP. So you see how that kind of plays in. Let's say you're attacking, a couple guys or even one guy or a group, and their leader gets fucked up, or half of the group is taken out, or one guy in particular, or you're fighting one guy and he's down 1/3 of his HP, or in the group one of the guys is taken out that brutally down to 1/3 of his HP. The rest of them are doing morale checks like, this is getting kind of dangerous. Is this really worth continuing, So that's kind of the idea behind that. They're doing a morale check to see if they're going to stick around and continue to fight to the death or whatnot, or flee and surrender, which I love. It's very realistic to me. It's immersive when you do that because, not everybody's going to fight till the death, So some of these enemies might just be a paid gig, or maybe like it's some fun on the side. Maybe they're just committing some crimes and they're not scared to pull a gun, but they're really not trying to fight to the death. So that morale check kind of plays into that side of things, and I really enjoy it. Now let's get into some of the optional rules. I mentioned before that this is all about style, very little crunch, and I love that about Cyborg. You can really lean into the role play and creating stories that really come to life, but there are some optional rules in here. So if you do want to add a little bit of crunch, and I'm going to be honest, I use these optional rules, and it's not too much crunch, really. It adds a little bit more to the game and gives you some options to use, hence the idea of it being an optional rule. But yeah, it's not too much. I like it. I think it adds some flavor. I don't use all of them. I use some of them. Let's get into it. Let's get into some of them. The first optional rule is cover, and I think that's important. They explain how you can use cover, how it makes it more difficult to hit the target, how the cover can take damage and be reduced to tier if it's heavy or light cover, and it goes into those details, but I really enjoy that. We use the cover optional rules. The next one is aiming, and I absolutely use that too, and that's about using your turn to kind of aim, and it increases your chances of hitting the target. Ultimately, it gives you some rules that kind of boosts your attack by aiming, ultimately, which is just taking one of your turns, one of your rounds or actions, I should say. The next thing is ranged attacks. I don't really use this so much, but it makes sense to me. I could see why people would use it, and it basically explains how the range can affect the attack, the difficulty, right? Like if you're really close or you're really far, it makes it easier or harder to make that shot. And it's only in extremes, when you're like hand to hand using a ranged attack, or really far away using a ranged attack. So I can understand that, but I don't use it so much. But it's there. Check it out. You might find it useful in your game. Now the next thing is hits always hurt. This has got to be my favorite optional rule because it is one of my homebrews that I've been using forever. If you've seen the Cybernation Uncensored GM tips, crash course tutorials on Cyberpunk Red, or the homebrew that was released by Artausorian Games in their downloadable content. I believe it was September of last year. I was part of that. I did a whole GM tips section. It's still on the Artausorian Games website, but I talk about taking a little bit of damage with every hit. Because the idea there is, even if you're wearing like a bulletproof vest, Kevlar or something, that bullet's going to hit, and it might not get through the armor to truly cause you a lot of damage, but that thud is going to cause a bruise, possibly a fractured rib. Like in real life, if bullets hit you, even with a bulletproof vest, it's gonna hurt. So that's the idea there is, and I only do that with ranged. Keep that in mind. And these optional rules, they talk about, every successful hit at least causes 1 point of damage. For me, I only do that for ranged. I don't think, if you have armor and someone hits you with a blade and it ricochets off or doesn't slice all the way through, I don't think that's really going to get through and cause like intense bruising or a fractured rib or anything like that to take 1 HP. But I use that optional rule of hits always hurt for ranged attacks, so feel free to do the same. The last thing is suppressive fire, which is always fun. If you've ever used suppressive fire in other games, you know how that can be very helpful, and in this case just as much so check that out. It explains how to use suppressive fire to your advantage, and again, it's an optional rule. Take it or leave it. And there you have it. There is combat. I just went over all of combat in like a handful of minutes, maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever that was, and that goes to show you how easy Cyborg is to just dive in and have fun with. It's not so much crunch that you're spending all this time memorizing everything and you got to look up all these rules. You can easily wrap your head around how it works and why it works, and then there's even some optional rules to spice it up and give you a little more crunch if that's what you're looking for. So there you have it. I hope that was helpful and you enjoy these crash course tutorials. Please leave this video a like, give it a share, leave me a comment. Let me know if these videos are helpful. I would really love some feedback. And let me know if you're enjoying Cyborg by Free League Publishing and Stockholm Cartel. I absolutely love the game, and I hope you do too. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Cybernation Uncensored.